My name is Margaret Thorne, and I'm 71 years old. This is my story, and I need you to hear every word of it, because what I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the people I trusted most. So please, settle in and listen carefully to what happened to me. This isn't just a story about betrayal or secrets. It's a story about survival, about finding strength you didn't know you had, and about refusing to let the people who hurt you win. I lived in a beautiful old Victorian house on Magnolia Lane in a small town called Wrenwood, nestled in the hills of northern Georgia. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where the bakery on Main Street still wraps your bread in brown paper, and where neighbors bring you soup when you're under the weather. The town has one traffic light, a courthouse square with a gazebo, and a diner that's been serving the same meatloaf recipe since 1947. I loved that house. I loved that town. For 42 years, I thought I knew every corner of my life there. My husband's name was Thomas Thorne. He was a good man, or at least that's what I believed for all those decades we spent together. He was a civil engineer, practical and methodical, the kind of man who labeled everything in the garage and kept receipts in alphabetical order. He had a booming laugh that filled our home, and he never forgot our anniversary. Not once. Every year, without fail, he'd bring me yellow roses, my favorite, and take me to dinner at the Italian restaurant on Oak Street, where we'd had our first date. Thomas died on a Thursday afternoon in late April. The doctor said it was a massive stroke. Sudden, they told me. Nothing anyone could have done. He was 70 years old, and though he'd had high blood pressure, he'd been managing it with medication. He took his pills every morning with his coffee, went for walks in the evening, and seemed healthy for a man his age. Everyone at the funeral said the same thing. At least it was quick. At least he didn't suffer. I nodded and accepted their casseroles and their condolences, and I tried to believe that his death made sense. But in the back of my mind, something felt wrong. I couldn't name it then. It was just a whisper, a shadow at the edge of my grief. Thomas had been fine that morning. We had breakfast together, discussed the weather, made plans to drive into Atlanta the following week to visit the botanical gardens. And then he'd gone into his study to work on some paperwork, and 2 hours later, I'd found him collapsed on the floor, already gone. The paramedics came. The doctors came. They did everything they could, but it was too late. And in the chaos and confusion of those first hours, I didn't have time to question anything. I just held his hand in the hospital room and tried to understand that the man I'd loved for 42 years was never coming home. Thomas and I had one son together, named Colin. But Thomas also had a daughter from his first marriage, a woman named Simone. Simone was 48 when Thomas died, living in Charleston with her husband, a man named Philip, who worked in finance. Simone had always been polite to me, always cordial. But there was a distance between us. Not hostility exactly, but a coolness. Like I was a piece of furniture in her father's house that she'd learned to walk around. I'd tried over the years to build a relationship with her. I'd invited her to holidays, sent birthday cards, asked about her life. But Simone remained at arm's length, never quite letting me in. I told myself it was natural. She'd been 17 when her parents divorced, old enough to feel loyalty to her mother, and I was the woman who'd married her father afterward. Some wounds don't heal, and I accepted that. After the funeral, Simone stayed for nearly a week. She went through Thomas's office with an intensity that surprised me. She said she was looking for insurance papers, for account information, for anything that might help me settle his affairs. I was too numb to question it. Grief does that to you. It makes you slow, makes you trust people you shouldn't. Every morning, Simone would disappear into Thomas's study and spend hours going through filing cabinets and desk drawers. She'd emerge with folders and documents, asking me questions about policies and accounts I barely understood. I let her handle it because I couldn't bear to do it myself. Every paper, every file was a reminder that Thomas was gone, and I wasn't ready to face that yet. What I remember most about those early days was the silence. Thomas had always filled the house with noise. He hummed while he cooked breakfast. He talked to the television during the news. He left doors open and drawers half closed. He'd sing in the shower, off-key but enthusiastic. He'd call my name from different rooms, just to tell me something he'd read in the newspaper, or to ask where I put his reading glasses. When he was gone, the house became a mausoleum. I wandered through it like a ghost myself, moving from room to room, without purpose, sitting in chairs and forgetting why I'd sat down. The silence was oppressive, heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on me. I'd wake up in the morning and reach for Thomas's side of the bed, forgetting for just a moment that he wasn't there, and then the reality would crash over me again. It was 3 months after the funeral when I found the letter. I'd been cleaning out the attic, something I'd been putting off because I knew it would be full of Thomas's things that would remind me of him in ways I wasn't ready for. But summer had come, and the heat made the attic unbearable, and I knew if I didn't deal with it soon, everything up there would be ruined. The heat in Georgia is unforgiving, and I'd already noticed water stains on some of the boxes near the window. I'd enlisted the help of my neighbor Patricia, who brought over iced tea and moral support. We spent the morning going through boxes of old clothes, holiday decorations, and forgotten treasures from decades past. Patricia would hold something up and ask if I wanted to keep it, and more often than not I'd shake my head and tell her to put it in the donation pile. It was exhausting work, physically and emotionally. Every box contained memories, snapshots of a life I'd lived with Thomas. His old college textbooks, photo albums from vacations we'd taken, birthday cards I'd given him over the years that he'd saved without telling me. I found the letter in an old wooden box, the kind with brass hinges that Thomas had kept his personal papers in. It was tucked beneath a stack of old tax returns, sealed in a plain white envelope with my name written on the front in Thomas's careful handwriting. "Margaret," it said, "open this exactly 5 years after my death, not before." I sat on the attic floor with dust motes floating in the sunlight around me, and I stared at that envelope for a long time. My hands were shaking. Patricia had gone downstairs to get more garbage bags, so I was alone when I found it. Why would Thomas leave me a letter to open 5 years after his death? What could possibly be in it that required me to wait that long? The envelope was thick, as if there were multiple pages inside. I turned it over and over in my hands, looking for any other clue, any hint of what it might contain. But there was nothing except my name and those instructions, written in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting. I thought about opening it right then. I thought about it for a full 10 minutes. But Thomas had been specific. He'd underlined the words "not before" twice. And in 42 years of marriage, I'd learned that when Thomas was specific about something, he had a reason. He wasn't a dramatic man. If he said to wait 5 years, then there was a reason to wait 5 years. So I took the envelope downstairs and I put it in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, beneath a stack of old greeting cards and photographs, and I tried to forget about it. But of course, I couldn't forget. How do you forget that your dead husband left you a message from beyond the grave? A message you're not allowed to read for 5 years. It sat in that drawer like a stone, heavy and cold, and every time I opened the drawer for anything else, I saw it, and I wondered. I wondered what Thomas had been thinking when he wrote it. I wondered when he'd written it, whether it had been days before his death or years before. I wondered if he'd known something was going to happen to him, or if this was just his way of leaving me one last message, one last connection to him after he was gone. The wondering kept me up at night. I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling and imagine what the letter might say. Maybe it was something romantic, a final declaration of love. Maybe it was practical advice about managing the house or the finances. Maybe it was nothing at all, just a few sentences that wouldn't explain anything. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Thomas wouldn't have made me wait 5 years for something simple. There was a reason for the delay, and whatever that reason was, it was important. The first year after Thomas died was the hardest. I learned how to be alone in ways I'd never had to be before. I learned how to fix the leaking faucet in the guest bathroom, how to change the furnace filter, how to cook for one. These were things Thomas had always handled, or things we'd done together, and now I had to figure them out on my own. I also learned how to navigate social situations as a widow. People treated me differently. Some were overly solicitous. asking constantly if I needed anything, if I was all right, treating me like I was made of glass. Others seemed uncomfortable, as if widowhood were contagious, and they kept their distance. And some people, well-meaning but clueless, would say things like, "At least you had so many good years together," or "He's in a better place now," as if any of that made his absence easier to bear. Colin, my son, called me every Sunday. He lived in Boston with his wife Diane and their 2 children, Emma and Jacob. He offered several times to come down and stay with me, but I told him I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I needed to learn how to be. I needed to prove to myself that I could survive on my own, that I wasn't helpless without Thomas. Colin is a professor at Boston University, teaching history, and he has Thomas's thoughtful, analytical nature. When he called, he'd ask specific questions about how I was doing, not just the general "how are you" that most people asked, but real questions. Are you sleeping? Are you eating properly? Have you been out of the house this week? He cared, genuinely cared, and I loved him for it. Simone called less frequently. Every few months, she'd check in, ask how I was doing, ask if there was anything she could help with. The conversations were always brief, always surface level. I got the sense she was calling out of obligation rather than affection. That was fine. I didn't expect anything more from her. We'd never been close, and Thomas's death hadn't changed that. But then, about 18 months after Thomas died, something odd happened. Simone called and asked if I'd ever thought about selling the house. The question caught me off guard. "Sell the house?" I said. "Why would I sell the house?" "It's just so big for one person, Margaret," she said, her voice smooth and reasonable. "And the upkeep must be exhausting. The property taxes alone must be a burden. I just thought, maybe you'd want something smaller, something easier to manage, a condo maybe, or one of those nice retirement communities." I told her I hadn't thought about it. The house was big, and yes, the upkeep was a lot for a woman my age, but it was my home. It was where I'd raised Colin, where I'd spent my entire adult life. Every room held memories, every corner had a story. The idea of leaving it felt impossible. "Well, if you ever change your mind," Simone said, "Philip knows some real estate people in the area. We could help you get a good price. The market is really strong right now." I thanked her and ended the call, but the conversation stayed with me. Why was Simone suddenly so interested in whether or not I sold the house? She'd never shown any attachment to it before. If anything, she'd always seemed eager to leave whenever she visited. She'd never spent more time here than absolutely necessary. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, and thought about Simone going through Thomas's office after the funeral. I thought about the way she'd looked at me when the lawyer read the will, the way her expression had flickered, just for a second, when she learned that the house had been left to me outright. Had she expected something different? Had she thought Thomas would leave the house to her, or split it between us? The thought had never occurred to me before, but now it lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. I didn't know, but the question bothered me enough that I got out of bed and went downstairs to make tea. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Thomas and I had eaten breakfast together for 42 years. And I tried to make sense of my unease. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe grief had made me suspicious where there was nothing to be suspicious about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was something I was missing. The second year passed, then the third. I kept myself busy. I volunteered at the library 3 days a week, shelving books and helping with the children's reading program. I joined a book club that met every other Tuesday at the coffee shop downtown. I took up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Life went on, the way it does, even when you think it shouldn't. I made new friends, other widows mostly, who understood what I was going through. We'd meet for lunch, go to movies, take day trips to nearby towns. It helped, having people who knew what it was like to lose a partner after decades of marriage, who understood the loneliness and the grief and the strange freedom that came with being on your own after so long. But every few months, Simone would call and mention the house again. Always casually, always in passing. "Have you thought any more about downsizing? Philip mentioned there's a lovely senior community opening up near Savannah. Beautiful facilities, very safe. You know, Margaret, at your age it might be smart to simplify things. What if you fell and no one was there to help you? Each time, I told her I was fine where I was. Each time, I felt a little more uneasy. The calls started to feel less like concern and more like pressure, a steady drip of suggestions designed to wear me down. And through it all, the letter sat in my nightstand drawer, waiting. The 4th year was when I started noticing the other things. Small things, things that didn't add up. I was going through some old financial records, trying to organize Thomas's accounts, and I found a property tax bill for a piece of land I didn't recognize. It was a small parcel, maybe 5 acres, located about 20 miles outside of Wrenwood, in an area that had been mostly farmland when Thomas and I first moved to town. But according to the bill, the land had been reassessed recently, and the value had jumped significantly. The bill showed that the property taxes had tripled in the last 3 years. Where they'd once been a few $100s annually, they were now over $3,000. That kind of increase didn't happen unless something major had changed. I called the county assessor's office and asked about it. The woman on the phone, a cheerful lady named Betty, who sounded like she'd been working there for decades, told me the area had been rezoned for commercial development about 3 years ago. Land values had tripled almost overnight. "You're sitting on a gold mine, honey," Betty said. "That whole area is getting bought up by developers. Strip malls, restaurants, office buildings. Your 5 acres could be worth a small fortune." I thanked her and hung up, and I sat at the kitchen table with the tax bill in front of me, and I thought, why didn't Thomas ever mention this land? In 42 years of marriage, he'd never said a word about owning property outside of our house. I went back through his files looking for anything related to the land. I found the original deed, dated 30 years ago. Thomas had bought it for $12,000, back when it was just empty farmland with no development potential. But I also found something else, tucked into a folder marked Miscellaneous. A letter from a real estate development company, dated 6 months before Thomas died, offering to buy the land for $380,000. $380,000. I read the letter 3 times, my heart pounding. The letter was from a company called Kane Development Group, and it was signed by someone named Victor Kane. The offer was straightforward, professional, no nonsense. They wanted the land. They were willing to pay cash. And they asked Thomas to contact them at his earliest convenience to discuss terms. There was a handwritten note at the bottom of the letter, in Thomas's writing: "Called and declined. Not interested in selling." So Thomas had turned them down. But why had he never told me about any of this? Why had he kept this land a secret for 30 years? I started digging deeper. I went through every file in Thomas's office, every drawer, every folder, and I found more. Bank statements showing regular property tax payments for the land going back decades, insurance documents, correspondence with the county about zoning changes. Thomas had been meticulous about this land, keeping track of every detail, every document. Not once. That night, I pulled the sealed envelope out of my nightstand drawer and held it in my hands. I was so tempted to open it. But Thomas's words were clear. 5 years, not before. I had 1 more year to wait, but now I knew the wait would be worth it, because whatever was in that letter, it had something to do with this land, with the secrets Thomas had been keeping, and with the reasons Simone was so interested in getting me out of this house. The 5th year arrived faster than I expected. Time has a way of doing that, when you're dreading something. The anniversary of Thomas's death came in April, and I spent the day alone as I always did, visiting his grave, bringing yellow roses, sitting on the bench nearby, and talking to him the way I used to talk to him at the kitchen table. The cemetery was peaceful, located on a hill overlooking the valley, with old oak trees providing shade and birds singing in the branches. Thomas's headstone was simple, just his name, his dates, and the words "beloved husband and father." I'd chosen those words carefully, wanting something that captured who he'd been, without being overly sentimental. "I'm going to open your letter soon," I told him, sitting on the bench and looking at his grave. "And I hope you're going to explain everything, because I'm starting to think there are things you kept from me. Things I need to know. A land, Thomas. Why didn't you tell me about the land? And what does Simone have to do with all of this? The wind moved through the trees above me, and for a moment, I let myself believe he could hear me. I let myself believe that somewhere, somehow, he was watching over me, and that he'd left me the tools I needed to understand everything. I trust you, I said quietly. I've always trusted you, so I'm going to wait the full 5 years like you asked, and then I'm going to open that letter, and whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. I promise. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and tell me from which city you belong so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. It was on a Wednesday morning in July, exactly 5 years to the day after Thomas's death, that I finally opened the envelope. I made myself a cup of tea first. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Thomas and I had eaten thousands of meals together, and I placed the envelope in front of me. My hands were steadier than I expected. Maybe because I'd been waiting so long for this moment. Maybe because I'd already suspected that whatever was inside would change everything. The morning sun came through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the floor. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the sound of birds outside. I took a deep breath, picked up the envelope, and carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. Thomas's handwriting covered both sides, small and precise, the way he always wrote when something was important. His engineering background showed in his writing. Every letter carefully formed, every line straight. The letter began, "Margaret, if you're reading this, then I've been gone for 5 years, and I hope that's been long enough. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. I'm sorry I had to make you wait, but I needed to make sure you were safe, and I needed to make sure certain people had enough time to show their true intentions." I stopped reading. My heart was hammering in my chest. What did he mean, make sure I was safe? Safe from whom? I kept reading, my hands beginning to shake now. My death was not an accident. I know the doctors will say it was a stroke, and maybe technically it was, but it didn't happen on its own. Simone has been pressuring me for 2 years to sell the land outside Renwood. She found out it had been rezoned, and she wants the money from the sale. She's in debt, Margaret. Deep debt. Philip's business failed 3 years ago, and they've been hiding it from everyone. They owe hundreds of thousands of dollars to creditors, and they're desperate. They need that land, and they've made it clear they're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. I stopped breathing. I read the words again. Simone, debt, whatever it takes. My hands were shaking so badly now that I had to put the letter down on the table to continue reading. The letter continued. I refuse to sell. The land is yours, Margaret. It always has been, even if I never told you about it. I bought it for us, for our future, thinking that someday we might build a retirement home there, or that it would be something to leave to Colin. I never imagined it would become valuable like this, but when the rezoning happened, everything changed. The developer started calling, and somehow Simone found out about it. I don't know how, but she did. I thought back to Simone going through Thomas's office after the funeral. Had she been looking for documents about the land even then? Simone wouldn't let it go, the letter continued. She started visiting more often, bringing Philip with her, and they kept pushing. At first it was subtle, suggestions that I should diversify my assets, that land prices were at their peak, and I should sell while I could. But when I kept refusing, it got worse. They suggested I wasn't thinking clearly. They said I was getting forgetful, that I was making poor financial decisions. Philip even had the audacity to suggest that I might need someone to help manage my affairs, maybe even a power of attorney arrangement. I felt sick. I remembered some of those visits, though I hadn't paid much attention at the time. Simone and Philip coming for Sunday dinner, the conversation always somehow turning to finances and planning and making smart decisions. And then, about a month before I died, Simone recommended a new doctor. A neurologist, she said, someone who could help with my memory issues. Memory issues. Thomas had never had memory issues. His mind had been sharp as a tack, right up until the day he died. I went to see the doctor because Simone insisted, and because I'll admit, she'd planted enough doubt in my mind that I wondered if maybe I was forgetting things. He had an office in Atlanta. Very professional, very credible. He ran some tests, asked me questions about my daily life, my routines, and then he prescribed me medication. He said it would help with my blood pressure and cognitive function, that it was a new treatment showing remarkable results. I was gripping the edge of the table now, my knuckles white. I took it for 2 weeks, and I started feeling worse. Dizzy, disoriented, exhausted. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. I'd forget where I was for a moment, or lose my train of thought mid-sentence. Things that had never happened before. So I stopped taking it, and I started feeling better within days. That's when I knew. I put my hand over my mouth, feeling tears starting to form. That's why I couldn't go to the police, and that's why I couldn't tell you while I was alive. But I believe Dr. Collier was prescribing me something that was making me sick, either on purpose or because Simone told him I had symptoms I didn't actually have. I think she was trying to either kill me or make me incompetent enough that she could take control of my affairs. And I think when the medication didn't work fast enough, they found another way. Another way. I felt cold all over. I don't know what they did, Margaret. I don't know if they gave me something, or if they just waited for the medications I was taking to interact badly with my actual heart medication. But I started feeling strange in those last few weeks, more tired than usual, chest pains I hadn't had before, and I knew something was wrong. I was crying now, tears running down my face, but I kept reading. I kept records. I kept everything. There's a room beneath the house, a room I built years ago for storage, and I've hidden everything there. Medical records, financial documents showing Philip's debts, recordings of conversations I had with Simone and Philip. Everything you need to understand what happened. And Margaret, I need you to use these records. I need you to make sure Simone doesn't get away with this. I need you to protect yourself, because if she was willing to do this to me, she won't hesitate to do it to you too. A room beneath the house. I'd lived in this house for 42 years, and I'd never known there was a room beneath it. The letter ended with, "Go to the basement." On the north wall, behind the shelving unit with the paint cans, there's a panel. Move the cans and you'll find it. Everything you need is inside. I'm sorry I had to do this to you, Margaret. I'm sorry I had to make you carry this burden alone, but I trust you. I've always trusted you. You're stronger than you think, stronger than anyone gives you credit for. And I know you'll do the right thing. You have 5 years to prepare. 5 years to watch and see if I'm right about Simone. If I'm wrong, if she leaves you alone and doesn't try to pressure you about the land, then maybe I was paranoid, and you can destroy everything in that room. But if I'm right, if she's been calling you, pressuring you, trying to get you to sell the house or the land, then you'll know, and you'll have everything you need to stop her. I love you, Margaret, more than I ever told you, more than I ever showed you. You were the best part of my life, and I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. Always yours, Thomas. I sat at the table for a long time after I finished reading, the letter clutched in my hands, tears streaming down my face. Not because I was sad, though I was sad, but because I was angry, angrier than I'd ever been in my entire life. Thomas had known. He'd known what Simone was doing, and he'd faced it alone, without telling me, without giving me the chance to help him or protect him. He'd died keeping secrets, trying to shield me from something I should have known about. But he'd also left me the tools to do something about it, and I wasn't going to let him down. I wiped my face, stood up, and walked to the basement door. My legs felt shaky, and my heart was pounding, but I was filled with a cold, clear determination. And I was going to use every single piece of it. I went to the basement. The basement stairs creaked as I descended, the sound familiar after 4 decades of doing laundry in the damp space below. I'd been down here countless times, carrying baskets of clothes, sorting through holiday decorations, occasionally looking for a tool from Thomas's workbench. But I'd never really looked at the space itself, never questioned its dimensions or examined its walls. The basement was exactly as I remembered it. Concrete floor, exposed beams running across the ceiling, a single light bulb hanging from a pull cord that cast harsh shadows into the corners. The washer and dryer stood against one wall, the dryer rattling slightly even when off, the way it had for the past 5 years. Along the north wall was the shelving unit Thomas had built decades ago. Sturdy pine boards stacked with old paint cans, boxes of nails and screws, tools we never used anymore, coils of rope, and miscellaneous hardware accumulated over a lifetime of home ownership. Now, I looked at that wall differently. I approached the shelving unit and started moving the paint cans one by one, setting them carefully on the floor. Some were half full, some completely dried out, their labels faded and peeling. I found cans of colors we'd used in rooms that had been repainted multiple times since, colors I'd forgotten we'd ever chosen. Seafoam green from the guest bathroom, butter yellow from the kitchen in the 90s, deep burgundy from Colin's bedroom when he was a teenager. Behind the cans, once I'd cleared enough space, I could see what Thomas meant. There was a seam in the drywall, barely visible, running vertically about 3 feet wide and 6 feet tall. It wasn't a crack or a flaw in the construction. It was a deliberate cut, disguised so carefully that unless you knew to look for it, you'd never notice it. The joint compound was perfectly smooth. The paint matched exactly. I ran my fingers along the seam, feeling for any gap or irregularity. The cut was professional, precise, the work of someone who knew what they were doing. Thomas had always been meticulous with his projects, but this was something else. This was the work of a man who needed to hide something, and hide it well. There, near the bottom left corner, I found a small indentation, just big enough for my fingertips to grip. I hesitated for just a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I pulled. The panel swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow doorway leading into darkness. The opening was small, maybe 2.5 feet wide, and just over 6 feet tall. Thomas would have had to duck slightly to enter. Beyond the threshold, I could see nothing but blackness, could smell the musty scent of undisturbed air. I went back upstairs, my legs trembling now, and got the heavy-duty flashlight we kept in the kitchen drawer for power outages. I also grabbed my phone, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe just to have something familiar in my hand, some connection to the world above. When I returned to the basement, the open panel looked even more ominous. It was like a doorway into another world, a secret world that Thomas had built without me knowing. I stood at the threshold for a long moment, shining the flashlight into the darkness, trying to see what was inside. The beam illuminated concrete walls, rough and unpainted, and a small space beyond. I could see the edge of a metal filing cabinet, the corner of a desk. I took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway. The room was small, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls on all sides and a low ceiling, just barely tall enough for me to stand upright. The air was cool and dry, and I could hear the faint hum of a dehumidifier running somewhere in the corner. Thomas had thought of everything. I shined the flashlight around, taking inventory. There was a metal filing cabinet against one wall, the kind you'd find in any office, with 4 drawers. Next to it was a small desk, and on the desk sat a laptop computer, closed, with a power cord plugged into an outlet I could now see in the wall. There were shelves lining 2 of the walls, stacked with boxes and binders, everything labeled in Thomas's neat handwriting. I found a light switch near the door and flipped it. A single fluorescent bulb flickered to life overhead, casting the room in harsh white light. Now I could see everything clearly. The filing cabinet had labels on each drawer: medical records, financial documents, legal papers, personal notes. The shelves were organized with the same precision. One held binders labeled by month and year, starting 3 years before Thomas's death. Another held boxes marked recordings, USB drives, photographs. This wasn't just a hiding place. This was an archive, a carefully constructed, meticulously organized archive of evidence. I stood in the center of the room, slowly turning in a circle, trying to process what I was seeing. He'd built a secret room beneath our house, excavated the space, poured the concrete, installed electricity, and filled it with documentation, all without me knowing. How long had it taken him? Months? Years? And how had he done it without me noticing? We'd lived together, eaten together, slept in the same bed every night. How had I missed this? But even as I asked the question, I knew the answer. Thomas had been patient. He'd waited for times when I was out of the house, at my book club, at the library, visiting Colin. He'd worked in small increments, quietly, carefully. And he'd hidden it well enough that even if I'd happened to glance at the basement wall, I wouldn't have seen anything amiss. The thought made me feel strange, a mixture of awe and betrayal. Awe at his dedication, his thoroughness, his determination to protect me. Betrayal that he'd felt the need to hide this from me, that he hadn't trusted me enough to tell me what was happening while he was still alive. But I also understood why he'd done it. He'd said so in the letter. He couldn't prove what Simone was doing, not definitively enough to go to the police. And if he'd told me without proof, what could I have done? Confronted her? She would have denied everything. Stopped visiting? That might have accelerated whatever plans she had. Thomas had chosen to document everything, to build an ironclad case, and to leave it for me to find, after enough time had passed, that Simone's intentions would be clear. I opened the filing cabinet, starting with the top drawer labeled Medical Records. Inside were folders, dozens of them, organized chronologically. I pulled out the first one dated from 3 years ago and opened it. Inside were photocopies of Thomas's medical records, going back decades. His regular checkups, his blood pressure medications, his cholesterol tests. Everything was normal, routine, unremarkable. Thomas had been healthy for a man his age. But then, about 2 years before his death, there was a new folder. This one was labeled Dr. Raymond Collier, neurologist. Inside were photocopies of prescriptions, medical intake forms, and a handwritten log in Thomas's writing. The log was dated and detailed every appointment he'd had with Dr. Collier, every medication prescribed, every symptom he'd experienced. The first entry read, Initial consultation. Simone insisted I see a specialist about memory issues I'm supposedly having. Told her I'm fine, but she was persistent, even emotional about it. Scheduled appointment to put her mind at ease. Dr. Collier seemed professional, ran cognitive tests, all of which I passed easily, prescribed medication anyway, said it was preventative. The next entry dated 1 week later. Started the medication Dr. Collier prescribed. It's called donepezil, supposed to help with cognitive function. Took first dose this morning with breakfast. The entries after that became more concerning. Day 3 on medication. Felt dizzy this afternoon. Had to sit down while working in the garage. Chalked it up to the heat. Day 5. Dizziness worse. Also feeling nauseous. Can't focus on reading. Day 7. Woke up at 3 a.m. with heart racing. Couldn't get back to sleep. Told her I was fine. Didn't want to worry her. Day 10. This medication is making everything worse. I'm not more alert. I'm less alert. I'm forgetting things I never forgot before. Misplaced my keys 3 times this week. Forgot what day it is twice. Day 12. Called pharmacy to verify the prescription. The dosage Dr. Collier prescribed is double what's standard for someone with my condition. In fact, according to the pharmacist I spoke with, donepezil is typically prescribed for Alzheimer's patients, which I definitely don't have. Asked pharmacist what side effects to expect at this dosage. She listed dizziness, nausea, fatigue, cardiac arrhythmias, confusion, vivid dreams, muscle weakness. Day 14. Stopped taking the medication this morning. Enough is enough. Within hours, I started feeling better. By evening, I felt more like myself than I had in 2 weeks. There was a note at the bottom of the page in red ink. Dr. Collier either prescribed the wrong medication and wrong dosage due to gross incompetence, or he prescribed it deliberately to cause these symptoms. Given that Simone specifically recommended him and has been pushing me to appear cognitively impaired, I'm beginning to suspect the latter. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, the folder in my lap. My hands were shaking. Thomas had documented everything, every symptom, every concern, every suspicion, and he'd stopped taking the medication when he realized it was hurting him. But had that been enough? Or had the damage already been done? I opened another folder, this one labeled Simone and Philip, Financial Records. Inside were bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, court filings. I'm not a financial expert, but even I could see the pattern. Philip's company, something called Garrett Investment Solutions, had filed for bankruptcy 2.5 years before Thomas died. The court documents showed debts totaling over $600,000, but that wasn't all. There were also personal loan documents, second mortgages, credit card statements showing massive balances. Simone and Philip were drowning in debt, and they'd been hiding it from everyone. There were printouts of email exchanges between Simone and various real estate developers. I found the correspondence with Victor Kane from Kane Development Group, the company that had made the offer to buy Thomas's land. In one email chain, dated about a year before Thomas died, Simone had written to Kane, "My father owns the property, but he's being difficult about selling. He's getting older and isn't thinking as clearly as he used to. I'm working on the situation. Give me some time." Kane had responded, "Time is something we don't have a lot of. The zoning window for this development is tight. If we don't acquire the land within the next 18 months, the opportunity closes. Can you expedite?" Simone's reply, "I understand the timeline. I'm working on it. My father is stubborn, but there are ways to handle stubborn old men. I'll keep you updated." Ways to handle stubborn old men. I read that line over and over, feeling rage build in my chest. There were more emails, getting progressively more desperate as Thomas continued to refuse to sell. And then, dated 4 months before Thomas died, there was this. "Victor, I know we discussed this before, but I need to be frank. My father is not going to sell. He's made that clear. However, he's not in good health. His memory is failing, and I believe he may not have much time left. Once he passes, the land will either come to me or to his widow, and either way I'll be able to move forward with the sale. I need you to be patient a little longer." I felt sick. I put the folder down and pressed my hands to my face, trying to breathe. 4 months before Thomas died, Simone had been telling a developer that Thomas didn't have much time left. And then, exactly 4 months later, Thomas had a massive stroke and died. That wasn't a coincidence. I forced myself to keep going. I opened the drawer labeled Recordings. Inside was a small digital voice recorder, the kind journalists use, along with several USB drives, carefully labeled with dates and brief descriptions. The recorder had a post-it note stuck to it, in Thomas's handwriting. "Start with recording from April 3rd. It sets the context for everything else." I picked up the recorder with trembling hands and found the file dated April 3rd, the year before Thomas died. I pressed play. There was a moment of silence, then Thomas's voice, calm and steady. "This is April 3rd, 11 a.m. I'm recording this conversation with Simone because I need to have a record of what she's saying to me. She's coming over for lunch, and based on our phone call yesterday, I know she's going to bring up the land again." I heard the sound of a door opening. Footsteps, Simone's voice calling out, "Dad, I brought sandwiches from that deli you like." Thomas, "In here, Simone. Kitchen." More footsteps, the sound of a bag being set down, chairs scraping. "Simone, how are you feeling? You sounded tired on the phone yesterday." Thomas, "I'm fine, just been busy." Simone, "You know, Dad, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I don't think you should be pushing yourself so hard at your age. You're 70 years old. You should be relaxing, enjoying your retirement." Thomas, "I am enjoying my retirement." Simone, "But you're still managing all your properties, dealing with taxes and maintenance and everything else. It's a lot. Have you thought any more about selling that land outside town? It's just sitting there, Dad. It's not doing anything for you." Thomas, "I've told you, I'm not interested in selling." Simone's voice changed, became sharper. "But why? That land is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars now. You could sell it, set Margaret up for life, set me and Philip up. We could all benefit. Why are you being so stubborn about this?" Thomas, "Because it's not for sale. I bought that land for Margaret and me, for our future. It's staying in the family." Simone, "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. That's a huge asset just sitting there. What if something happens to you? What if Margaret can't manage everything? You're putting her in a terrible position by not dealing with this now. Thomas, Margaret will be fine. The land stays with her. There was a long pause, and then Simone's voice, colder now. You know, Dad, Philip and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you. You're forgetting things. You're not as sharp as you used to be. Last time we visited, you couldn't remember where you'd put your wallet. You asked Margaret the same question 3 times in one afternoon. Thomas's voice was firm. I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't been forgetting things. Simone, Dad, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but I think you need to see a doctor, a specialist, someone who can evaluate whether you're still capable of making these kinds of financial decisions. Thomas, are you suggesting I'm incompetent? Simone, I'm suggesting you might need help. There's no shame in that. Lots of people your age need assistance managing their affairs. Maybe it's time to think about giving Philip and me power of attorney, just in case. There was a long silence on the recording. Then Thomas said, his voice carefully controlled. Simone, I want you to leave now. Simone, Dad, I'm just trying to help. And don't come back unless you can show me some respect. The recording ended with the sound of a chair scraping, footsteps, a door closing. Then Thomas's voice again. That conversation confirms what I've been suspecting. Simone is trying to establish that I'm mentally incompetent, so she can either force me to sell the land or take control of my affairs and sell it herself. She even made up incidents of me forgetting things that never happened. She's building a narrative, and she's willing to lie to do it. The recording clicked off. I sat there in that small concrete room, listening to my dead husband's voice, and I felt something harden inside me. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. Proof that Simone had been systematically working to undermine Thomas, to make him appear incompetent, to position herself to take control of his assets. And if she'd been willing to do that, if she'd been willing to lie and manipulate and gaslight her own father, what else had she been willing to do? I spent the next 3 hours going through every file, every recording, every document in that room. By the time I emerged, I had a complete picture of what had happened. Simone and Philip had been in financial trouble for years, drowning in debt from Philip's failed business and their own extravagant lifestyle. When they discovered that Thomas owned land that was now worth a fortune, they'd seen it as their salvation. But Thomas had refused to sell, and he'd refused to loan them money. And he'd been clear that the land was intended for me and Colin, not for Simone. So Simone had decided to take matters into her own hands. She'd started planting seeds of doubt about Thomas's mental competency. She'd recommended Dr. Collier, who had prescribed medication that made Thomas sick and confused. She'd documented false incidents of memory loss and poor judgment. She'd built a case that Thomas was declining cognitively and needed someone to manage his affairs. And when all of that hadn't worked fast enough, when Thomas had stopped taking the medication and started to recover, she'd done something else. Something that Thomas hadn't been able to prove, but that he'd suspected. In his final notes, dated just a week before his death, Thomas had written, "I've been feeling chest pains for the past few days. Different from normal heart pain, more persistent. I'm also having episodes of extreme fatigue and disorientation that come on suddenly. Margaret noticed yesterday that I was sweating profusely and couldn't catch my breath. I told her it was just the heat. But it wasn't. Something is wrong, and I don't think it's natural. Simone visited 3 days ago and made me a pot of her special tea, said it was an herbal blend that would help with my blood pressure. I drank it to be polite. The symptoms started that evening. I can't prove anything, but I don't believe in coincidences anymore." I felt cold all over, reading those words. Simone had visited. She'd made Thomas tea. And then he'd started having the symptoms that would, a week later, lead to the stroke that killed him. I couldn't prove it either. The tea was long gone, and even if it had contained something harmful, there was no way to test for it now. But combined with everything else, with the pattern of behavior, with the documentation of Simone's desperation and her willingness to lie and manipulate, it painted a clear picture. Simone had killed Thomas, maybe not with her own hands, Not directly, but she'd created the conditions for his death. She'd weakened him with medication, stressed him with constant pressure, and then possibly poisoned him to finish the job. And she'd almost gotten away with it. I climbed the basement stairs slowly, my legs shaking with exhaustion and emotion. It was late afternoon now, the sun slanting through the windows at that golden angle that made everything look softer and more beautiful than it was. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, forcing myself to go through the familiar motions. Fill the kettle. Turn on the stove. Get a cup from the cupboard. Choose a tea bag. The routine helped calm me, helped me think clearly about what came next. I had evidence, mountains of evidence, but I didn't know if it was enough. I didn't know if what Thomas had documented was sufficient to actually prove that Simone had committed a crime. She hadn't directly killed him after all. She'd pressured him, yes. She'd lied about him, yes. She'd possibly even poisoned him, but I had no proof of that last part. What I needed was legal advice. I needed someone who could look at this evidence objectively and tell me what it meant, what could be done with it, and what my options were. I needed a lawyer. Thomas's lawyer, the man who'd handled our wills and estate planning for years, was named Harold Greenfield. He'd always struck me as honest and competent, the kind of man who thought carefully before speaking and who wouldn't make promises he couldn't keep. I found his card in Thomas's desk and called his office. It was after 5, and I expected to get voicemail, but to my surprise, a woman answered. Greenfield and Associates, this is Jennifer speaking. Hello, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is Margaret Thorne. Harold Greenfield handled my late husband's estate. I need to speak with him about something urgent. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne, but Mr. Greenfield has left for the day. Can I have him call you tomorrow? It's very important, I said. It concerns new information about my husband's death. Hold on, please. I waited, listening to soft classical music, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes. Then a man's voice came on the line. Mrs. Thorne, this is Harold Greenfield. Jennifer said you have new information about Thomas's death? Yes, I said. I found something. Something Thomas left for me. A letter and evidence. A lot of evidence. I need your help, Harold. I need to know what to do with this. There was a long pause. What kind of evidence? The kind that suggests Thomas's death wasn't natural. The kind that suggests someone may have been trying to harm him. Another pause. Longer this time. Mrs. Thorne, these are serious allegations. I think we should meet in person to discuss this. Are you available tomorrow morning? Yes, I said. But Harold, I don't want to bring the evidence to your office. Can you come here, to my house? Of course. How about 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? That works. Thank you, Harold. Margaret, he said, his voice gentle. Whatever you found, we'll figure it out together. Try to get some rest tonight. I promised I would, though I knew sleep would be impossible. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and thought about what came next. I thought about Simone, about whether she knew I'd found the letter, about whether she was still waiting for me to cave and sell the land. And I realized something. Simone had no idea that Thomas had left me evidence. She thought that after 5 years, the trail had gone cold, that I'd accepted Thomas's death as natural, that I was just a lonely old widow who'd eventually sell the house and the land and fade away. She had no idea what was coming, and I was going to make sure she never saw it coming until it was too late. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I went down to the basement, into Thomas's hidden room, and I sat in the chair at his desk. I opened the laptop, which powered on immediately, and I found files he'd organized, digital copies of everything in the filing cabinets. There was also a video file on the desktop, labeled, "For Margaret." I hesitated for a moment, then clicked on it. Thomas's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in this same chair, in this same room, the concrete walls visible behind him. He looked tired, older than I remembered him, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Hello, my darling," he said, and my breath caught in my throat. If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you've found this room, and you're trying to figure out what to do with everything I've left you. First, I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive. I'm sorry I had to carry this burden alone. But I want you to know that I did it to protect you. If I'd told you what I suspected, you would have been in danger too. Simone would have seen you as an obstacle, just like she saw me. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Margaret, you're the strongest person I've ever known. You don't always see it in yourself, but I see it. I've seen it for 42 years, and I need you to use that strength now. I need you to take everything in this room and use it to make sure Simone doesn't get away with what she's done. Not for me, because I'll be gone and it won't matter to me anymore. But for you, because if she's willing to do this to me, she won't stop with me. She'll come after you next, trying to get that land, trying to get everything she thinks she's owed. He paused, and I saw his expression soften. I love you, Margaret. I've loved you since the day we met, and I'll love you forever. You made my life worth living. You gave me joy and purpose and a home that felt like heaven. And if I could change things, if I could make this easier for you, I would. But I can't. All I can do is give you the tools to fight back. Please use them. Please don't let her win. The video ended. I sat there in the darkness, tears streaming down my face, and I whispered to the empty room, I promise, I won't let her win. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Harold Greenfield arrived at exactly 10 o'clock the next morning, driving a sensible gray sedan that he parked in my driveway with the precision of someone who'd been practicing parallel parking for decades. He was a tall man in his 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in a dark suit despite the summer heat. I'd been watching for him from the living room window, and I opened the door before he had a chance to knock. Margaret, he said, his voice warm with concern. Thank you for coming, I said, stepping aside to let him in. I know this is unusual. After 40 years practicing law, he said with a slight smile, very little qualifies as unusual anymore. But I'll admit, your call yesterday got my attention. I led him to the kitchen and offered him coffee, which he accepted. We sat at the kitchen table, and I could see him taking in my appearance, the dark circles under my eyes, the tension in my shoulders. I probably looked like I hadn't slept, because I hadn't. Before we begin, Harold said, pulling a legal pad and pen from his briefcase, I want to make sure you understand that anything you tell me is protected by attorney-client privilege. I also want to make it clear that I'm here to help you, not to judge you or whatever you've found. I understand. Good. Now, why don't you start from the beginning? So I did. I told him about finding the letter in the attic 3 months after Thomas died. I told him about Thomas's instructions to wait 5 years before opening it. I told him about Simone's repeated calls over those 5 years, always asking about the house, always suggesting I should sell, always pressuring me to simplify my life. And then I told him what was in the letter. Harold listened without interrupting, making occasional notes on his legal pad. His expression remained neutral, professional, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his pen paused when I mentioned Dr. Collier and the medication. When I finished describing the letter, I said, There's more. Thomas left me evidence, a lot of evidence. It's in a hidden room in the basement. Harold's eyebrows rose slightly. A hidden room? Thomas built it, without me knowing. It's behind a panel in the basement wall. Would you like to see it? Yes, Harold said, standing immediately. Very much. I led him down to the basement, showed him the panel, and took him into the small concrete room. Harold stood in the center of the space, slowly turning in a circle, taking in the filing cabinets, the desk, the shelves full of carefully organized evidence. My God, he said softly, Thomas really did build a case. Yes, I said. He documented everything. Medical records, financial documents, recordings of conversations. It's all here. For the next 2 hours, Harold went through the files systematically, starting with the medical records and working his way through the financial documents. He listened to several of the recordings, reading along with Thomas's written transcripts. He examined the emails between Simone and the developers. He studied the notes Thomas had made in the final weeks of his life. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. "Margaret," he said carefully, "what Thomas has documented here is extraordinary. The level of detail, the organization, the thoroughness, this is evidence that would hold up in any court. However, I need to be honest with you about something." My stomach tightened. "What?" "What we have here is clear evidence of financial manipulation, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. What we don't have is definitive proof of murder. The medication prescribed by Dr. Collier could be explained as a medical error. The tea Thomas mentioned, we have no physical evidence of. The stroke that killed him, even with the suspicious timing, could be argued as natural causes exacerbated by stress." I felt my hope deflating. "So this isn't enough?" "I didn't say that," Harold said quickly. "What I'm saying is that this evidence is enough to launch a serious investigation. It's enough to bring criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. But whether it's enough to prove that Simone directly caused Thomas's death, that's less certain. It depends on how the prosecutor's office views it, what additional evidence can be gathered, and what Dr. Collier might say if questioned under oath." "So what do we do?" I asked. "Then," he said, "we need to be strategic about this. If we go to the police right now with this evidence, they'll open an investigation, and Simone will immediately lawyer up and stop talking. What we need is for Simone to incriminate herself further. We need her to admit to her involvement, or at least to make statements that support what Thomas documented." "How do we do that?" "We tell her that you've been going through Thomas's old papers and you've found documents about the land outside town. We tell her you're considering selling it, and you want her advice. We see what she does, what she says, whether she tries to pressure you or make an offer. You want to set a trap," I said slowly. "I want to give her an opportunity to reveal her true intentions," Harold corrected. "Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings, which means you can legally record any conversation you're part of, without the other person's knowledge. If we can get Simone to admit to what she did, or even just to make statements that align with Thomas's suspicions, it would strengthen the case significantly." I thought about this for a long moment. The idea of deliberately engaging with Simone, of pretending everything was normal while secretly recording her, made me feel sick. But I also knew Harold was right. We needed more than just Thomas's documentation. We needed Simone's own words. "All right," I said. "What do I need to do?" Harold spent the next hour coaching me on what to say, how to say it, and what to listen for. He also set me up with a small digital recorder, showing me how to turn it on discreetly and how to position it so it would pick up both voices clearly. "The key," he said, "is to let Simone do most of the talking. Ask open-ended questions. Act uncertain like you're looking for guidance. She'll see you as an easy target, someone she can manipulate. Let her think she's succeeding." "I can do that," I said, though my stomach was churning with anxiety. "I'll be here," Harold said. "When you set up the meeting with Simone, I'll position myself somewhere in the house where I can hear what's happening, but where I'm out of sight. If at any point I think you're in danger, I'll intervene immediately." That evening, after Harold left, I called Simone. She answered on the third ring. "Margaret, is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine," I said, forcing my voice to sound light and friendly. "I'm sorry I haven't called in a while." "I've been meaning to reach out." Simone said, No, don't apologize. I'm just glad to hear from you." "How have you been?" I said. "I've been well. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I'd been going through some of Thomas's old papers, trying to get things organized, and I found something interesting." "Oh?" Simone's voice sharpened with interest. "What did you find?" I continued. "Documents about a piece of land Thomas owned, outside of town. I didn't even know about it until I found the property tax bills. Have you ever heard him mention it?" There was a brief pause before Simone answered, and I could almost hear her calculating how to respond. "Oh, yes, I think he might have mentioned something about that once." "Why do you ask?" I said. Well, the property taxes are quite high, and I've been thinking about what you said, about simplifying things. It seems silly for me to hold on to land I'm not using, so I thought maybe I should sell it. I could hear Simone's sharp intake of breath. That's very smart thinking, Margaret, very practical. You know, Philip and I would be happy to help you with that. We know people in real estate. Would you? I said, letting relief color my voice. That would be wonderful. I don't really know where to start with something like this. Of course, Simone said warmly. Listen, why don't Philip and I come up this weekend? We can look at the documents together and figure out the best approach. Saturday work for you? Saturday would be perfect, I said. We'll be there around 10. Margaret, I'm really glad you called. I think this is the right decision. Thank you, Simone. I'll see you Saturday. I hung up and sat very still for a moment, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd set the trap. Now I just had to hope that Simone would walk into it. The next few days passed slowly. I prepared the house, cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, organizing papers that were already organized. I was nervous, constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Harold called every evening to check on me and to go over the plan again. Remember, he said, let her lead the conversation. Don't confront her. Don't accuse her. Just act like you're a confused old woman who needs help. That's what she'll be expecting. Saturday morning arrived, bright and clear. Harold came over at 8:30, and we set up the recording equipment. I would carry a small digital recorder in the pocket of my cardigan, and Harold would position himself in Thomas's study with the door cracked open, close enough to hear everything, but out of sight. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I took a deep breath, touched the recorder in my pocket to make sure it was running, and went to answer the door. Simone stood on my porch, dressed elegantly in cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse, her hair perfectly styled. Philip stood slightly behind her, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, his expression neutral, but his eyes watchful. "Margaret," Simone said, stepping forward to hug me, "you look wonderful." "Thank you for coming," I said, returning the hug and trying not to stiffen. "Please, come in." I led them into the living room, where I'd set out coffee and pastries from the bakery downtown. The whole scene was carefully staged to appear welcoming and normal, nothing that would put them on guard. "So," Simone said once we were settled, "tell us about this land. I have to admit, I didn't know Dad owned property outside of the house." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared, containing copies of the property tax bills and the original deed. I found these in his office. Apparently he bought this land about 30 years ago, and I never knew about it. The tax assessment shows it's worth quite a bit now. Simone picked up the papers and examined them, her eyes lighting up when she saw the assessed value. $300,000. That's significant. "I know," I said. "And the taxes alone are over $3,000 a year. It just seems like a burden, you know? I'm not going to do anything with empty land at my age." "You're absolutely right," Simone said, leaning forward. "Margaret, I think selling is the smart move. You could use that money, invest it, make your life easier." "Do you really think so?" I asked, playing uncertain. "I don't want to make a mistake." "It's not a mistake," Philip said, speaking for the first time. "That land is just going to sit there and cost you money. Better to liquidate it while the market is strong." Simone shot him a look, and I realized she thought he was being too obvious. She turned back to me with a softer expression. "Margaret, here's what I'm thinking. Philip and I have some contacts in real estate development, people who are actively looking for land in that area. I could reach out to them, get some offers, and then you could decide what you want to do. No pressure." "That would be helpful," I said. "But I should probably talk to a lawyer first, shouldn't I? Thomas's lawyer, Harold Greenfield. Just to make sure everything is handled properly." I saw something flash across Simone's face. Annoyance, maybe. Or worry. "Oh, I'm not sure that's necessary. This is a simple transaction. You'd just be paying Greenfield to do something Philip and I can help you with for free." "But wouldn't I need legal help with the paperwork?" I pressed gently. "We can handle that," Philip said. "I have lawyers who can draw up the documents. No need to involve Greenfield." They didn't want Harold involved, because Harold would ask questions, would review everything carefully, would protect my interests. Well, I said slowly, I suppose you know more about these things than I do, if you think that's best. I do, Simone said firmly. Trust me, Margaret. This is the right move and we'll make sure you get a fair price. Speaking of price, I said, what do you think this land is worth? Simone and Philip exchanged a glance. The assessed value is $300,000, Simone said carefully, but in a private sale, you might not get quite that much. Maybe $250, $275. I knew from Thomas's documents that the land had been appraised at over $400,000, and that developers had been offering as much as $380. Simone was already trying to lowball me. Oh, I said, letting disappointment show in my voice. I was hoping for more. Well, the thing is, Philip said, you have to factor in closing costs, agent fees, all of that. By the time you account for everything, $250 is actually pretty good. I suppose you're right, I said. You've been so helpful with this. I really appreciate it. Of course, Simone said, reaching over to pat my hand. We're family. We take care of each other. The irony of those words, coming from a woman who'd systematically worked to kill her own father, was almost too much. But I kept my expression neutral, grateful, the perfect image of a confused widow relying on family for guidance. Actually, Simone said, her voice becoming more casual, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. What's that? This house, it's so big, Margaret, and maintaining it must be exhausting for you. Have you thought any more about moving? Maybe something smaller, closer to Colin in Boston? I've thought about it, I admitted, but this is my home. I can't imagine leaving it. I understand, Simone said, but I could hear the frustration beneath her understanding tone. But Margaret, you have to think practically. What if you fell? What if you got sick and no one was here to help you? This house is too big, too isolated. It's not safe for a woman your age. A woman your age. The same phrase she'd used with Thomas, trying to make him feel old, incompetent, incapable of managing his own life. Maybe you're right, I said slowly. Maybe I should think about it. You should, Philip said. And if you did decide to sell, we could help with that too. Get you a good price, find you something more suitable. They wanted everything. The land, the house, complete control over my assets. Just like they'd wanted with Thomas. Let's take things one step at a time, I said. First the land, then we'll see about the house. Of course, Simone said, standing. We should probably get going, let you rest. But Margaret, I want you to know we're here for you. Whatever you need. I walked them to the door, accepted Simone's hug goodbye, and watched as they got into their car and drove away. The moment they were out of sight, Harold emerged from the study. Did you get all of that? I asked. Every word, he said, holding up his own recording device. Margaret, that was perfect. You did exactly what you needed to do. They're trying to cheat me, I said, my voice shaking now with anger and adrenaline. $250,000 for land worth over $400,000. Yes, they are, Harold agreed. And more than that, they're trying to isolate you to get control of all your assets. The same thing they tried to do with Thomas. What do we do now? I asked. Now, Harold said, we take this recording, along with all of Thomas's evidence, and we go to the police. We have enough now. Between Thomas's documentation and this recorded conversation, we can show a clear pattern of financial exploitation and elder abuse. And once the police start investigating, once they start asking questions about Dr. Collier and the medication and the timing of Thomas's death, other evidence will emerge. Are you sure? I asked. I'm sure, Harold said. Margaret, you did it. You got them to incriminate themselves. Now let's make sure they face the consequences. That afternoon, Harold and I drove to the county sheriff's office. We brought copies of everything. Thomas's medical records, the financial documents showing Philip's debts, the recordings, the emails between Simone and the developers, and the recording from that morning's conversation. We met with Detective Laura Brennan, a woman in her early 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to our story without interrupting, taking notes as Harold walked her through the evidence. When we finished, she looked at both of us for a long moment. Then she said, Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Greenfield, I want to be clear about something. What you've brought me is serious. Very serious. If even half of this is accurate, we're looking at multiple criminal charges. But I need you to understand that investigating a case like this takes time. We'll need to interview witnesses, subpoena medical records, potentially exhume Mr. Thorne's body for additional toxicology testing. I felt sick at the thought of Thomas being exhumed, but I nodded. I understand. I'll open an investigation immediately, Detective Brennan said. In the meantime, I need both of you to be very careful. If Simone Garrett realizes you're onto her, she could become dangerous. She could also flee or destroy evidence. What should Margaret do if Simone contacts her again? Harold asked. Continue to act normal, Detective Brennan said. Don't tip her off that anything has changed. And if she pressures you about anything, record the conversations and let me know immediately. We agreed, and then Detective Brennan spent another hour taking our formal statements and making additional copies of all the evidence. As Harold and I drove home, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. We'd done it. We'd reported everything to the police. But now came the waiting and the wondering about what would happen next. How long will this take? I asked Harold. Investigations like this can take months, he said honestly. But Detective Brennan struck me as competent and thorough. She'll do this right. The investigation took 4 months. During that time, I tried to live my life as normally as possible. I went to the library, attended my book club, worked in my garden. Simone called twice, asking about the land, and each time I was vague but pleasant, saying I was still thinking about it, still considering my options. Harold listened to recordings of those conversations and said I was handling it perfectly. Detective Brennan kept us updated on the investigation's progress. She interviewed Dr. Collier, who initially claimed the medication had been prescribed appropriately, but became flustered when confronted with evidence showing he'd prescribed double the standard dosage. She obtained Simone and Philip's financial records, confirming they were in massive debt. She interviewed Victor Kame from the development company, who admitted that Simone had contacted him multiple times about the land and had told him Thomas's health was failing. And then, in November, Detective Brennan called to tell me they were ready to make an arrest. We have enough for charges of elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and reckless endangerment resulting in death, she said. The DA believes we can prove that Simone's actions directly contributed to Thomas's death, even if we can't prove she deliberately poisoned him. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning. I wanted you to hear it from me first. The next day, Colin drove down from Boston to be with me. We sat together in the living room, drinking coffee and waiting, not talking much because there wasn't much to say. Harold called at 11 a.m. They arrested Simone an hour ago, he said. Philip is being charged as an accessory. It's done, Margaret. I felt something release in my chest, something that had been tight and painful for 5 years. Thank you, Harold, for everything. You did this, he said. You and Thomas. I just helped facilitate it. The trial took place the following spring. I attended every day, sitting in the courtroom and watching as the prosecution laid out their case. They presented Thomas's evidence, the medical records, the financial documents, the recordings. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about the medication Dr. Collier had prescribed and its effects. They showed the emails between Simone and the developers, the recorded conversations, the pattern of financial desperation and manipulation. Dr. Collier had been charged separately with medical malpractice and had surrendered his license rather than face a lengthy court battle. He testified against Simone in exchange for a reduced sentence, admitting that Simone had pressured him to prescribe medications that would make Thomas appear cognitively impaired. The defense argued that Simone had been acting out of genuine concern for her father, that the medications had been prescribed in good faith, that Thomas's death had been a natural stroke brought on by age and stress. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they came back, they found Simone guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was stern. Garrett, she said, you systematically exploited, manipulated, and abused your own father in pursuit of financial gain. Your actions may not have directly caused his death, but they created the conditions that led to it. You showed no remorse, no conscience, and no recognition of the harm you caused. This court sentences you to 12 years in prison. Philip received 6 years for his role as an accessory. When the judge read the sentences, I felt Colin's hand tighten on mine. We sat there together, and I thought about Thomas, about everything he'd done to make this moment possible. After the trial, I stood outside the courthouse in the spring sunshine, and a reporter approached me. She was young, maybe 25, with a notebook and a kind face. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, "do you have any statement?" Then I said, "My husband knew something was wrong, and he documented it, and he trusted me to finish what he started. That's all anyone needs to know." She wrote it down, and I walked away. I sold the land 3 months later, but not to any developer associated with Simone or her contacts. I found a regional agricultural cooperative that wanted to use it for a community farm and education center. They paid me $420,000, the full appraised value. I gave half the money to Colin for his children's education. I donated a portion to the local library in Thomas's name. I used some to make repairs on the house that I'd been putting off, and I kept the rest in savings, knowing that I was financially secure for the rest of my life. The house on Magnolia Lane is still mine. I've made some changes. Painted the shutters a soft blue-gray, replaced the back porch boards, updated the kitchen appliances, but it's still my home. Still the place where I spent 42 years with the man I loved. I turned Thomas's hidden room into a small library and workspace. I kept his desk, his tools, his radio. Sometimes I go down there in the evening and sit in his chair and work on projects, and I feel close to him in those moments. Colin visits often, bringing his family. We work in the garden together, cook Sunday dinners, tell stories about Thomas. The grandchildren are growing up knowing who their grandfather was, knowing that he was a man who stood up for what was right, even when it cost him everything. I also started volunteering with an organization that helps elderly people who suspect they're being financially exploited. I share my story, offer advice, connect people with resources. I've helped dozens of people over the past few years. And every time I do, I think about Thomas and how he would have wanted his story to help others. People in Wrenwood treat me differently now. Some with respect, some with curiosity, some with a wariness that suggests they're afraid of me. That's fine. I don't need everyone to understand what I did or why I did it. I know the truth, and that's enough. I'm 73 years old now, and I'm not done yet. I still have work to do, people to help, stories to tell. And I'm going to keep going for as long as I can, because that's what Thomas would have wanted. That's what he gave me the tools to do. So to everyone listening, to every woman who's ever been told she's too old, or too weak, or too confused to matter, I want you to know this. You are strong, and you are capable, and you have the power to change your life and demand justice. Don't let anyone take that power away from you. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Find your allies, be patient, and never ever give up. Because the truth doesn't rot. It just waits for someone brave enough to uncover it. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. My name is Margaret Thorne. I live on Magnolia Lane in Wrenwood, Georgia. And I want you to know that no matter where you are, no matter what you're facing, you are not alone. And together, we're stronger than anyone who tries to stop us. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care of yourself, and remember, age doesn't make you powerless. It makes you wise. And that wisdom is the most dangerous weapon against anyone who would try to take advantage of you. This is my truth. This is my testimony. And I share it with you so that you'll know what's possible when you refuse to be silenced.